It's the spring of 1942, and the Battle of Moscow has just come to an end. The offensive was called off by the worst Russian winter since the last ice age as a result of satanic communist rituals and ancient Hebrew magic. The Germans decided there was only one course of action: secure the vast Russian oil fields in the Caucasus. The operation was named Operation Uranus by Hitler himself as the Germans prepared to enter Stalin's dirty back door. Participating in the offensive were 300,000 Axis troops of the 6th Army, consisting of Germans, Italians, Romanians, and Hungarians. The conditions of this event would be rough for all parties involved. Rations were low all around, and unsupported Axis minor troops had to take what they could get. Villages were raided, Soviet men were cannibalized by the bloodthirsty and barbaric soldiers who had only ever known war and violence. German troops were to be the spearhead of the offensive, while the 3 allied nations were to provide defense on the flanks, as they lacked armor and anti-armor equipment, including even the strongest Balkan nation of the alliance, Italy. At the opening of the offensive, German troops pushed hundreds of miles across the untamed Ukrainian wilderness in mere hours. The Axis front lines were thinning on the approach to Moscow, as troops had to be spared to imprison millions of Soviet POWs from recent encirclements. The advance was so quick that Soviet air bases didn't have time to flee to further bases, and their aircrafts were swiftly stolen by the Axis. So terrifying was the Axis advance that a full 25% of the Eastern Ukrainian army and a majority of the Caucasus forces immediately shit their pants upon hearing of the Axis advance. Within a month of the offensive, the unstoppable German Panzer Corps had broken through the suburbs of Stalingrad, and Soviet troops were encircled on a short strip of land along the Volga River. By this stage of the offensive, it became evident that the stolen Soviet planes didn't work, as they were built by Soviet scientists. Regardless, German aces were still able to gain air superiority through sheer force of will. As the Germans began pushing Soviet troops into the river and drowning them, accomplishing their objective, it looked as though the door had just been kicked in, and the whole rotten structure was about to collapse. Right before the moment the entire Soviet Union would fall, Stalin sacrificed 10 million Siberian civilians who conjured up a new Soviet army who were all horny and ready to fuck. With tens of thousands of T-34s powered by the souls of their enemy, they tried to break through the German lines, but they were immune to such trickery. As a last resort, Stalin sent reconnaissance to the flanks of the offensive, only to see the Hungarians and Romanians armed exclusively with trebuchets and stolen Adidas tracksuits. As the evil Soviet orc hordes knew they couldn't beat the Germans' superior technology directly, they decided to abandon what little honor they had left and avoid the German forces, just as they had done with Napoleon, an old pastime of the traitorous Slavs. Just as the war seemed to be over, 27 million Soviet soldiers arose from the dead and attacked the lines of the weak Balkan forces. The front collapsed almost instantly, and the German forces were encircled, as their allies were massacred mercilessly. Foreseeing a collapse in the front, German generals drew up a new plan to break out of the encirclement: Operation Thunderclap. Yes, it actually was called that. But Hitler, eternally seething, demanded that they stay and promoted General Paulus to Field Marshal, exclaiming no Field Marshal had ever surrendered. Seeing the writing on the wall and the Eastern Front hopeless, Field Marshal Paulus surrendered, saying he refused to die for a Bohemian corporal. Of the surrendered 90,000 Germans, only 5% would survive captivity, showing the ever-present bloodlust of the Russian people. From this point on, the war would forever be on the downturn for our Balkan brothers, as the Anglo and Mongol hordes drew ever closer to Berlin, dooming our realm to darkness for eternity.